The story of the 7 days of creation in Genesis is one of those stories pretty much everyone has heard. But what if we've been looking at that first chapter all wrong? We're about to dive into a way of looking at it that suggests the story isn't actually about the physical creation of our planet, but something else entirely. This is the big question, right? The one that changes everything. What if that incredible, epic story, light from darkness, the seas and the land, plants and animals just appearing, wasn't about the physical rock we're all standing on? What if it was the blueprint and not the building itself? Well, according to the source material for this explainer, the account that Moses got was intentionally simplified. It's kind of like a brilliant scientist trying to explain quantum physics to a 5-year-old. You're not going to hit them with the full mind-bending reality, right? You give them a simple model. The idea here is that the creation was like that. This was the foundational summary, with the truly magnificent, complex details saved for later. Okay, this next part is a really big deal. It all comes down to reframing one single word: created. The source we're looking at explains that the original Hebrew word doesn't mean to make something from nothing. It actually means to organize, and that shift in meaning changes the entire picture. Creation isn't about magicking things out of thin air, but about bringing order and purpose to materials that already existed. Hang on to that thought, because it is absolutely key for everything that follows. And boom, here it is. This is the verse from Moses chapter 3 that really unlocks the whole puzzle. The Lord says it right out loud. There was a spiritual creation before the natural or physical one. So the perspective we're exploring argues that the entire first chapter of Genesis, the whole 7-day story, is actually the story of that spiritual creation. So with that new framework locked in our minds, let's go back and walk through those famous 6 days again. But this time, we're going to see them through this new lens, as the 6 phases of organizing a spirit Earth. All right, day 1. The work kicks off, but not with physical stuff. No, this was the organization of spiritual materials, which are described as waters. Now, our source clarifies that these are real, actual elements. They're just much more refined than what we're used to. Think of them as the basic, foundational spiritual ingredients being gathered together to form the very basis of this new world. On day 2, a separation happens. These spiritual waters get divided, and a space is organized right between them. This space is called the firmament, or heaven. And that mass of spiritual material below the firmament, well, that's what's going to become the spirit Earth itself. The process keeps rolling on day 3. So now the spiritual materials are brought together, concentrated, allowing dry land to appear. And on top of this spiritual foundation, spirit plant life is organized. We're talking grass, herbs, and trees, all in their spiritual forms, each one distinct and organized after its kind. Day 4 is just fascinating. The newly formed spirit planet was actually placed into a solar system, complete with a sun and a moon. And this is so cool because it really illustrates a key idea from our source, that spiritual things are incredibly similar in their form and organization to the physical things we see all around us. Day 5 is when this new world starts to get really busy. It becomes teeming with spiritual life. Whales, all kinds of sea creatures, and birds are organized and put into this spiritual ecosystem. And get this. Listen to the command: be fruitful and multiply. The source points out that this is a major clue. It's a command that's looking ahead to a future physical existence where procreation would actually be a thing. And that brings us to day 6, the final day of this incredible spiritual creation. And it had 2 major events to really finish populating this new world. First up, the rest of the spiritual ecosystem is completed. All the land animals are organized. Cattle, beasts, and all the creepy crawly things are brought forth as spirit creatures. But the final, crowning act of this whole creation was still to come. And here we are, the absolute pinnacle of this whole process. Humankind, spiritual offspring, made in the very image of God, were placed on this amazing new spirit planet and given dominion over it. And with that, the spiritual creation was officially complete. So what's the big payoff? Why does looking at it this way even matter? Well, by understanding the spiritual creation first, the 2 creation accounts in Genesis, which can seem kind of contradictory, suddenly just snap into place. They form one single, coherent story. So the really crucial point here is that this isn't just someone's clever interpretation. The source material presents this as a direct clarification given right to Moses. It was an explanation to make sure he wouldn't get the spiritual story he'd just been given confused with the physical or temporal creation story that he was about to hear next.
Yeah, a scholar named B.H. Roberts, who's quoted in our source, just sums it up perfectly. If the two stories are describing two different events, one spiritual, one physical, then of course they're not going to be identical. There's no contradiction at all. And that one insight just solves the puzzle that's had people scratching their heads for centuries.
And hey, one last little point from our source that's super helpful to remember. In the scriptures, both the spiritual planet and the physical planet are just called the Earth. It's not like the Earth got a different name for its spiritual face the way some other figures did. It's just a small but important detail to keep in mind when you're reading these accounts so you don't get tripped up.
And this all leads to a final, pretty mind-blowing thought. The source mentions that one day the full, magnificent details of creation, knowledge which no man knew, is all going to be revealed. It really makes you stop and wonder, if this whole spiritual creation idea is just the simplified version, what other profound, absolutely magnificent truths about our world, and even about ourselves, are still out there just waiting to be understood?